Hello. I don't think anyone would disagree with me when I say Hollow Knight bosses are hard. Controversial take, I know, but true nonetheless. Beating one of them is no joke, let alone all of them in a row. This is what's commonly known as Pantheon 5, or P5 for short. Heck, only 12% of players have even achieved this, so if you're one of the lucky few, give yourselves a pat on the back. But there are some who push this even further and try to beat Pantheon 5 as fast as possible. I think they call themselves speedrunners? The world record for this run as of right now is 15 minutes and 56 seconds, held by a player by the name of Rainie 923. With the number of bosses in P5 sitting at 42, that's an average of 23 seconds per boss. To take this even further, here are the hit point values of every boss in Pantheon 5. And here's that number all added together. This means that Rainie would have to deal roughly 60 damage per second to achieve the time that they did. An impressive feat, considering most of the bosses die relatively quickly, and there's multiple seconds of downtime at the beginning and end of every boss. Amazingly, Rainie's run is roughly 2 minutes behind the TAS of Pantheon 5, which sits at 13 minutes and 38 seconds. That's tool-assisted speedrun. Simply put, a TAS allows someone to create inputs one frame at a time, allowing for strats and damage rotations that wouldn't be possible to achieve for a normal human. Using the same math as before, that means the TAS sits at 19.5 seconds per boss, or around 71 damage per second. That's all well and good, Cactus, I hear you saying, but what does this all matter? Excellent question, made-up viewer. To put it simply, I want to know the theoretical damage ceiling. That is to say, if these numbers are what's possible for humans to achieve with what the base game has given us, if we fudge the rules just a little bit, how much further can we go? There are a couple things we can do to achieve this. First, let's take a look at the charms used in Rainie's run. If you've ever seen a Hollow Knight speedrun before, you probably recognize the ones that make this build what it is. The most notable among them being Fury of the Fallen, a charm that doubles your nails damage while at 1 HP, and Fluke Nest, a notoriously broken charm used in longer speedrun categories. However, there's something in our way of our theoretical ceiling: the notch limit. In Hollow Knight, the player starts with 3 charm notches, and with 8 others you can collect in the game, that adds up to a total of 11. However, using a feature called Overcharming, you are allowed to surpass this limit at the cost of A, not being able to equip any more charms past this, and B, taking double damage from every single hit. While this may sound like a hindrance, it actually makes the speedrun for P5 faster. By using the Mask Binding, an optional difficulty modifier for the Pantheons, players are set to a max of 5 HP, meaning it will only take 2 hits to activate the aforementioned Fury of the Fallen instead of 4. This is all to say that while these 2 charms are enough to carry us to victory within the constraints of the base game, I want to go even further beyond. Using mods, we're able to equip any number of charms we want, and while it sounds like that's our solution right off the bat, actually doing this has some ridiculous results. On top of that, just equip everything isn't a very satisfying answer. Which begs the question, in a theoretical conversation about imaginary bugs, what would be a good solution? To answer this, we need to take a closer look at these little guys, the charms. There's a total of 45 of them in the game, and with the aforementioned notch limit of 11, for a combat-centric build, we're only, on average, able to equip 5 or 6 of them. More if you're overcharming. Even if we're more generous with 7, that's still roughly 1/6 of all charms in the game. However, some charms are more suited for general utility than combat, so excluding these charms, the total number of our options comes down to 30. Going back to our number of 7, I think if we add 3 charms for a total of 10, that will be both a fair showcase of a player's skill, as well as a nice representation of the cast of charms. So, 3 extra doodads added to our arsenal. We could add the Illustrious Soul Eater, a charm that almost triples the amount of soul you gain for each nail hit, which would allow us many more casts to defeat bosses with. Or perhaps we use Grubberfly's Elegy, a charm that gives you a Zelda-esque beam while at full or 1 HP. This would even allow us to double hit some larger bosses, once with our nail and another with the energy beam, both from the same swing. Or, if we didn't want to sacrifice the damage and instead just increase the range of the nail, we could use Mark of Pride. However, I believe the optimal builds would look like this. The first two charms don't need much explaining. Shaman Stone is an easy increase in damage, and Soul Eater will make it so we never run out of soul. But this charm? Of all charms? Let me explain. Let's start off by saying that there is not much room for improvement in the current builds. This category has been carefully planned, each fight specifically honed to be lightning fast. It's not that far of a stretch to say that some, or most bosses have been planned down to the hit. To explain, certain bosses in Hollow Knight are able to be staggered, that is, put into a state of incapacitation for a couple of seconds, allowing the knight to either heal or charge a stronger attack for extra damage, like a nail art or spell. These stagger counts are very carefully planned around for the boss fights in which they apply, meaning any altering done to these counts thanks to our extra charms could harm or otherwise hinder the speed in which we can beat them. Usually, Glowing Womb doesn't do much of anything useful, but here in this theoretical scenario, it gets to shine. Glowing Womb spawns hatchlings every 4 seconds that deals 9 damage each, consuming 8 soul from the knight. The knight gains 11 soul from a single hit for reference, up to a maximum of 4 hatchlings on screen at a time. With Fury of the Fallen, however, which we luckily already have equipped, they deal an extra 5 for a total of 14. And since we basically have infinite soul from Soul Eater and the copious amounts of slashing we do with the nail, it's a permanent uptime of 14 extra damage every 4 seconds. This is increased at the beginning of fights thanks to this little thing I mentioned earlier. Each boss has a death and spawn animation, meaning we technically get to squeeze in extra DPS during this downtime. These times aren't consistent, but they range from around 10 seconds for shorter animations to 15 to 17 for longer ones. These include both the ending animation of the first boss, plus the spawning animation of the next. So, equipping Shaman Stone and Glowing Womb are our main sources of damage. I'd like to show you practical evidence of these in action. However, since I can't take the time, nor will I force someone to either task or do a run of this, we'll be sticking with our theoretical math. For argument's sake, let's pretend that we'll always have enough soul to spawn a hatchling every 4 seconds, or in other words, adding 3.5 damage per second. I know this isn't completely accurate, and there might be moments in the run where we would have max hatchlings and therefore our DPS would stop, but it sounds like an incredible chore to parse that out, so I won't. Sue me. So, adding 3.5 to our previous damage per second numbers, we have the task sitting at 74.5 damage per second, and humans at 63.5. But, we haven't accounted for Shaman Stone yet. Unlike Glowing Womb, we can actually quantify this number by counting every time a spell is used and adjusting the damage value in our heads. Normally, Fluke Nest will deal a total of 64 damage, but with Shaman Stone, it's boosted to 80. Again, this is some heavy rounding we're doing here, as not every spell used is Fluke Nest, nor will every fluke connect with the boss at every time. For our human run, the test doesn't really miss any damage. Anyways, in Rainie's run they used a spell 116 times, and in the TAS it was 110. This comes out to 7,040 damage for the TAS, and 7,424 damage for the humans. If we equip Shaman Stone, however, those numbers change to 8,800 for the TAS, and 9,280 for the humans. If we'd find the difference in damage, and then divide those numbers from our overall times to get our final DPS numbers. The theoretical pinnacle of Hollow Knight damage. I rounded the numbers, don't worry, I didn't do my math wrong. Also, for kits and shiggles, here's how those numbers change the overall times of the run. Neat. Hollow Knight is an amazing game with a fantastic community. With all the strats that are constantly being discovered, and the skills of the players getting better and better, I wouldn't be surprised if this theoretical ceiling would eventually become very, very real. Thanks for watching.